As I said, we are here today for a book launch, which is very nice because the first time that I met Aisha Ijaz Khan was actually at a fundraiser where she had contributed proceeds or part of the proceeds, or all of them, fantastic, that's great, to this charity. So actually I walked up to her and I said, anybody who does that has to be very special. And I said, how come I don't know about your book? Because the book had just been published in August. And I then offered to her, I said, why don't you come to the High Commission and speak to a gathering here about your book and from your book. And she agreed to do that. So thank you, Aisha, for being here. A few words about Aisha. She is a lawyer and a practicing lawyer. She has lived in many different parts of the world, including the United States, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. She had her education, her undergrad was at Queen William and Mary in the United States. And then, of course, you did your law from UCLA, and followed by, you did the New York Bar, right? Okay. So she's a very accomplished lady. Most ladies are pretty accomplished. So that's no surprise. But it's great to have her because her book, I leave her to talk about her book and I leave you guys to really read it and decide for yourself. But what struck me was that it's a very interesting journey of somebody who is speaking from her own experience really about both the joys and the challenges of living in two worlds or between two worlds. And I think she raises in a very easily sort of readable style some very important, urgent and profound issues which all of us confront today. So I leave it to Aisha to read from her book as well as to talk about her book. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming here.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to begin today with a word of thanks. First of all, I'm extremely grateful to Her Excellency, Dr. Milia Lodhi, for offering the High Commission for this event tonight. I, as an ordinary Pakistani citizen living in London, feel extremely fortunate to have such a proactive High Commissioner who makes herself so accessible to the public. And under her leadership, we've had some very fascinating events at the High Commission. I believe she deserves a lot of credit for that. I would also like to thank Hajra Naveed, Faha Makhdoom, and of course Mr. Manzoor al-Haq for their excellent work in putting this evening together, as well as all the other High Commission staff who worked hard for this purpose. A word of thanks also to my husband Yusuf, who was very supportive and encouraging throughout the writing process, and he gave me very valuable feedback throughout as well. Finally, thank you to all of you in the audience for being here tonight and for taking the time to come to this launch. I really appreciate that. I intend to speak a little bit about why I wrote Rodeo Drive to Raja Bazaar, and then give you a feel for the main themes of the book and read a few passages from it, following which we can open the floor to an informal question-answer session where you can ask me anything you would like pertaining to what I've read or about the novel in general. I decided to write Rodeo Drive to Raja Bazaar about a year after the September 11 incident. Although I had thought about writing for several years prior to that, it was only after September 11 that I really felt I wanted to pen something down about the lives of ordinary Muslims. I wanted to portray a true picture, as opposed to the extreme images we are constantly bombarded with. The book is not about terrorism. It is in fact very light-hearted. It is about the effects of the changing environment on Muslim communities. It is an easy read, which even children can enjoy, and it's the sort of book where we can sit back and laugh at ourselves. The story is very Pakistani. It's about an expatriate family who starts off in America and then decides to move back to the country of their origin, Pakistan. It is narrated by a young girl who was born in America and then moves back at the age of 10. coming from a middle-class background, she has not had the means to travel frequently to her country of origin. And thus, in many ways, her new environment, when she does move back, is completely alien to her. Her adjustment is tough, but she manages. And when she returns to a post-9/11 America 10 years later after marriage, she has to adjust back to a country she only thought she knew. It is in that sense a typically Pakistani story that I think many of us can relate to, or perhaps even see a reflection of our own lives in. It is also a celebration of all good things that are Pakistani, and perhaps a critique of those that are not. The main themes of the novel again include trends which many of us may have experienced or observed, such as reverse migration, the rise of racial profiling, and the battle that Muslims increasingly face, both internally and externally. Several questions began popping in our minds after 9/11. Had a clash of civilizations become inevitable? Could Muslims continue to live in the West and feel comfortable? Or had globalization, in essence, reached its saturation point? Was it simply better not to venture to distant lands and stay put close to our roots? All of a sudden, many people who had spent years abroad began moving back. This trend is often referred to as reverse migration. Although it existed prior to 9/11, and in fact, the family that I write about in the novel moves back in 1994, well before 9/11, the incidents really became far more commonplace afterwards. And this manifests a whole new set of issues relating to identity, economic disparity, and even liberal forces clashing with conservative ones. Adjusting back to the country one left years ago is not always easy, specifically as it relates to children who have in fact been born abroad and then simply transplanted back. Or for those of us who decide to remain in our adopted lands, it is often just as difficult to, for instance, pass on our cultural identities to our children. I have observed that people often try to justify their own decisions in such matters, and sometimes this results in debate and discord. As an example, I would like to read you a passage from the book where relatives from across the globe fly in for a family wedding and debate whether it's better to live abroad or in Pakistan. "I don't know how you people do it," said one of Sabrina's cousins to the woman who had just arrived from Canada. "Live in those far-off cold countries where you spend all your time shoveling snow." She did not seem to appreciate the comment when the fashionable aunt joined in. "It can't be fun for you," she said pointedly. "It must be exhausting to put those little naughty kids of yours in snowsuits before going out anywhere. Look how good we have it here," she said proudly. Then turning to Deen Mohammed, she ordered, "Make sure you place a cotton cloth over my tissue ki sari before you iron it, okay?" He nodded. "Imagine having to do all that oneself," she asked, proving her point. The woman from Canada was not enjoying the conversation. "I'm only there for 3 years," she said defensively. "Then we will all get Canadian nationality and my children's future will be secure, and we can go anywhere we want to." "Well, I must say that the Canadian immigration policy is excellent," someone else said, joining into the conversation. "Not like the Americans. My son has been there for 7 years, and he's still only got a Pakistani passport." "Just you wait," warned another. "They're going to make it worse for us Muslims after the whole 9/11. "What nationality do you have?" Johnny asked me, suddenly, out of the blue. "American," I said, guardedly. "How come?" he asked, eyeing me suspiciously. "I was born there," I told him proudly. Ahmed's mom overheard our conversation. "So you were born there and then your parents moved back?" she asked me. "Yes, they came back when I was 10, I told her. Very wise, she repeated, shaking her head from side to side. "Unfortunately, Western nationality has become a must in this day and age." "What do you mean, become a must?" Sabrina's uncle, our host, scorned her remark. "Yes, if you people want to continue living and working in their countries, continue to let them exploit you, it's a must. What's wrong with our country? What's wrong with the way I live?" he asked in an air of arrogance. "Uncle, come on. You can't compare the opportunity here with the opportunities there," one of Sabrina's cousins countered him. That's what's wrong with your generation, the uncle retorted. Why can't you create the opportunity? Or why can't you live in less money? I didn't have all this the minute I graduated. I worked hard, and I remained in my country. I didn't change my allegiance. Actually, uncle, I don't see acquisition of a foreign passport as symbolic of altered allegiance. A foreign passport is more like a collector's item these days. I know people who have American, European, Canadian, and Pakistani passports simultaneously. It's all about opening doors. Interesting concept, Sabrina's dad mumbled, the first words he had spoken since he had been hit with the 20,000 rupee candy bill in the morning. So that's obviously a conversation from a more well-to-do crowd who have the means to travel and who have options in life. But it's impossible to set a story in Pakistan and not have characters from the various socioeconomic backgrounds that exist in Pakistan. I think many of us who live abroad and then visit back home or even move back home harbor a sense of economic guilt. We become accustomed to the safeguards in place in Western society. We take for granted the fact that the average person has access to decent healthcare and education. Yet when we move back, no matter how desperately we want to replicate that model, it becomes so difficult. And not just that, but sometimes even treating the economically disadvantaged with respect becomes a challenge. The next passage I intend to read exemplifies such a case. Despite our indulgence, Rabrakha had nevertheless been getting a bit out of hand. His envy of Dilsher had not subsided. Dilsher, realizing perhaps that he was the cause of Rabrakha's discontent, showed off even more and informed the deprived Rabrakha that he had acquired a wardrobe of no less than 10 pants and an equal amount of English shirts during his tenure as rent-a-car driver. Rabrakha, in his worn-out shalwar kameez, truly felt an underachiever beside the 3,000 rupee a month richer Dilsher in his pant and Angrezi kameez. It was not long before he approached Dad of his desire to dress more urbane and Dilsher-like. Dad, unsure of what Dadi's reaction may be, tried to postpone his transformation by offering to let him have a couple of his old trousers and shirts as soon as he was able to dig them out from old suitcases. But Rabrakha could not wait. There were only a couple of days left before Taya's departure, and Dilsher would have to go back with the car at the end of their visit. Then who would take Rabrakha shopping? He trusted only Dilsher's fashionable taste. Dad, unable to see much harm in Rabrakha's desire to revolutionize his garb, finally allowed him to go to the market with Dilsher. Later that evening, there was a breezy lift to the air, and as we strolled close to home, a familiar face appeared on the opposite end of the street. The slim figure of the young man looked recognizable, yet unidentifiable. He wore black trousers, a light pink half-tucked shirt, a short black leather jacket, thick black sunglasses, and slippers. In his hand, he held a lit cigarette, which he occasionally puffed up to his lips and then blew out, swaying idyllically in his gait, as if he owned the world. "Isn't that Rabrakha?" asked Rocky, the first to spot him. "Isn't it too dark for sunglasses?" Sunny inquired. "Where did he get them? He didn't show those to me." Dad sounded annoyed. We were all amused and concerned at the same time. "Does he still work for us?" I asked naively. "Yes, of course," Mom said, "but what are we going to do about this?" Dad and Taya debated whether to confront him red-handed or pretend we had not seen him at all. Drinking the Perrier in the hopes of a quick high and buying the fancy clothes was one thing, but now, roaming the streets, cigarette in hand, gangster-like in his jacket and half-tucked shirt, was quite another. Sooner or later, his late-blooming adolescence would have to be addressed. Luckily, for Dad and Taya, we were not the only ones who had caught Rabrakha in the act. Makhan, along with Allah Vasaya and Allah Dinda, had seen him too, on their way to Dadi's house to reap the benefit of his employment. But unlike Dad and Taya, they were not confused about how to handle the situation. In front of our eyes, Allah Vasaya and Allah Dinda held on to each arm, while Makhan twisted Rabrakha's earlobe full force. I heard an unexpected yelp out of Rabrakha, his cool eyewear falling to the floor, as they rushed him back to Dadi's house. Dadi, disturbed by the commotion, had walked out onto the veranda. She gasped, eyes popping, her hand covering her open mouth, as soon as she laid eyes on the trendy version of Rabrakha. Allah Vasaya slapped him once, followed by Allah Dinda. and then, in front of everyone, Makhan ordered him to sit in rooster position. This was a common punishment in Pakistani villages, but Rab Rakha was being subjected to it in the capital city. Apart from the economic disparity, which is so apparent in Pakistan, another surprise to many who have lived abroad for many years is sometimes how liberal parts of Pakistan may have become. Ironically, those of us who live abroad sometimes cling so fiercely to tradition and interpret religion perhaps in a more rigid way than our counterparts in Pakistan. Maybe it's for fear of losing our identity. Conversely, those who have not left Pakistan sometimes take a far more flippant view, taking religion in their stride, allowing tradition to evolve. It is therefore shocking for them also to see how conservatively their Western counterparts may be living. The next passage exemplifies such a case. So, Bibi, how long has it been since you've started wrapping this napkin around your head? Began one of the guests, referring to Tai's head cover. It has been many years now, Tai said, uncomfortably. Do you think you've suddenly become more pious than the rest of us with this bundling of the head? Demanded another. Tai looked disgusted, but sensing that she was outnumbered, thought it best not to respond. Oh, forget it. We know you from when you were a young girl. We attended your wedding. Don't you remember, Salma, the woman asked, turning to one of her approving companions? She wore a sleeveless dress on her wedding day. How scandalous it was then. She gasped and then continued. Nowadays, girls wear all kinds of clothes. But 20 years ago, that too in Pindi, a sleeveless bride was definitely the talk of the town. So what are you hiding now, Bibi? Everyone's seen it all. What's the point of concealing your grainy hair when you flaunted it in your youth? Tai's patience had been tested, and she spoke out fiercely in her own defense. I have seen you people in Pakistan. You are drifting away from religion. You should come and see what good work my organization has done in America. We have converted so many Americans. Islam is the fastest growing religion in North America. What do you do here except criticize others? Come on, Bhabhi, how many Americans have you converted? I also lived in America. Mom disputed her assertion. Many, many Americans, Tai insisted, pounding her fist on the edge of the sofa as she argued her position further. Most of all women, and they're not like Muslim women in this country. They wear the hijab or head cover properly. Our organization is even looking for suitable Muslim husbands for them. Looking for Muslim husbands? Don't you think of packing off my Rocky or Sunny to some white convert? What do they have to lose? Today they try one thing and 2 years later something else? Who is to say they won't be fascinated by Sikhism or Buddhism next? Yes, yes, that's it. Americans are confused and misguided, always searching for new gimmicks. The other women chanted, agreeing with Dadi. Clearly not enjoying the interrogation, Tai searched for a distraction. Chalo bacho, come on children, time for namaz. Rocky, Sunny, come on. Natasha, come on, she said, rushing. Come on, Natasha, I thought. Did I really have to pray just because Tai wanted me to? I looked to Mom, who ordered me to follow my cousins in piety. How odd. Mom and Dad had always encouraged me to pray, but never forced me to do so. Sometimes I even liked praying, but I had to be in the mood for it. I couldn't feign holiness on demand. This brings us to the other main theme of the book, and that is that just as divisions between Muslims and the West have begun to surface, so too have divisions amongst Muslims become far more pronounced and evident. Who is a moderate Muslim is perhaps the million-dollar question that nobody can answer. Is it someone who believes in women's rights? Or is it someone who battles for democracy? Or is it someone who criticizes but then capitulates to Western foreign policy? In the West today, perhaps the biggest concern is expelling any possibility of terrorism from our midst. But quite frankly, for us as Muslims, perhaps the biggest concern is taming the reaction to terrorism. Many of us feel that our voices have been dwarfed. We're afraid that we may constantly have to spend our time disassociating ourselves from and apologizing for the image of the barbaric terrorist. And that is why I wanted to paint the picture of a normal family at a time when Islam and normalcy are seemingly incongruous. The focus in the book is on the positive aspects of Muslim life, away from the demonized version of Islam. Since it's narrated by a woman, it talks about fashion and in-law trouble, and about the cook who does not return home from holiday on time, as much as it is a layperson's political summary of the past decade, with emphasis on what the average man or woman on the street feels and thinks about 9/11, post-colonialism, and even domestic politics. Throughout the novel, there are political discussions, which the narrator's father has with his friends and she overhears. I would like to read one such passage as the final piece that I read from the book today. "You're either with us or against us," President Bush reiterated daily as the American military prepared to attack Afghanistan. Pakistan tried frantically to persuade its Western neighbor to rethink its position, but the Taliban government remained fatalistically adamant and steadfast in its decision. Meanwhile, protests within Pakistan, especially from the religious groups, surfaced speedily. "Amerika ka jo yaar hai, gaddar hai," became a common slogan in the streets of Islamabad and Pindi that autumn. Notwithstanding local opposition, with a heavy heart, the Pakistani government assured the US of its full cooperation in the war against terror. The silent majority remained silent, except in closed quarters. "Who can fight them?" Dad's friend asked philosophically, and then answered his own question. "The problem is, we are not with them, but we are for the preservation of our country. And if that means bowing our heads for now, then God forgive us, so be it. Under the circumstances, Musharraf made the correct choice. We don't want to end up like Afghanistan or Iraq." "So you're a coward?" asked the belligerent one. "You'll allow yourself to be browbeaten into a stand which has innumerable negative ramifications, even if it means joining hands with the Christian West against a Muslim neighbor." But Pakistan tried its best to get the Taliban to give up Assam. If they had listened, they would not have to face the American military might. For the sake of one man who is not even Afghan, how can they destroy their whole country, Dad asked. "That's right," his friend agreed. "You heard Musharraf's speech. Even the Prophet entered into pacts with non-Muslims when it was expedient and wise to do so. One cannot be self-destructive. We have to build our countries up, economically, scientifically, in so many ways before we can even think of standing up to America. You people never came out of your subservient colonial mentality," the angry man claimed. "With that attitude, you'll never have the courage or the wherewithal to stand up to anyone. Cowards. I respect the Taliban for standing up for what they believe in. Osama is a hero for giving up all the wealth he was born in, moving to a war-ravaged nation, living with the poor, like the poor. Now that's a leader." The fourth man in the room had remained silent up to now, but lighting a cigarette speedily, he spoke up. "You're crazy," he said, inhaling a long puff. "If you feel so much for the Taliban, maybe you can move to Afghanistan." "I say good riddance. The Taliban were a menace to society. Not letting the women go to school or work? What kind of Islam is that? That's no way to live in the modern world, in this internet age. I say, while Musharraf has got the opportunity, he should clean out this nuisance from within our own borders also. These madrasa-produced zealots, he should just pull an Ataturk on them. Tell them he'll send them for Hajj and order the ship sunk," exhaling the smoke from his mouth, satisfied with his speech. At that point, the Osama lover was too offended to stay on, and he made his way to the door, in spite of Dad's insistence that he stay on for more tea. So all the conversations I read tonight are probably familiar to many of you in the audience, and you all may have witnessed them in some shape or form at some point. But they do ask a lot of pressing questions, and different Muslims have different views about this. Often clashes exist within the same family, and that's depicted in the novel, in fact. We live in a very difficult time, but perhaps debate about these issues and the freedom to express a plurality of views is the only way forward. And with that, I would like to encourage the audience to participate in a discussion or ask me any questions they may have pertaining to what I've read. I would also like to let you know that the book is on sale today, and anyone who buys a copy, I'd be happy to sign it. Thank you.
Why don't you take some class first?
Yeah.
पीछे से ले ले
I was interested in you saying that you wanted to represent the views of ordinary Pakistani. Judging from your own autobiography, yours doesn't sound like a particularly ordinary background. So I was actually more interested in hearing how somebody who was brought up in Pakistan, brought up in Saudi Arabia, became an international lawyer, and lived in America, which is not a very unusual, which is a very unusual experience. How that's formed your own sense of identity, and the journey you've gone on to, and why you've had the opportunity that you've had, and many other Pakistani girls, not to mention Pakistani boys, don't have those opportunities. Were you not more tempted, rather than to fictionalise and create characters that don't exist, to write a memoir which expressed your own journey?
Good question.
Well, with fiction, one can experiment a whole lot more than you can with a memoir. And I didn't think my own life was that interesting. And even though you say I have had an unusual background, and I take your point, that's true. But I've lived in Pakistan, and when I've not lived in Pakistan, I've visited Pakistan, and you can't help but get a feel for what if you want to, that is, get a feel for what the average person is thinking or feeling or how they're living. Obviously, you'll never know exactly unless you're in someone else's shoes, but I just felt that was something more interesting to write about, and if I was going to give a different view, it would be better if I did it from the point of view of more of an ordinary family than my own.
I think the gentleman right in front.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. I hope my question is sensible because I feel dominated by the stage guests, all female. And to Meghnash, I am going to ask you, what is behind rodeo in the title of your book? Because I had to open dictionary for that. Thank you.
Well, basically, Rodeo Drive is a very fancy street in Los Angeles, and since the novel begins in Los Angeles, it was just, and the family moves to the Islamabad area, and Raja Bazaar is located in Pindi. It's more of a metaphor of their journey, I suppose.
For Raja Bazaar, I know that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes.
As a novelist, who is your favorite novelist? I mean, Milan Kundera has also written one of the novels that has got similar theme. I mean, a bit different, of course. And to what extent you think that there has been a debate in literature, art for art's sake and art for life, and there has been a long list of the novelists belonging to one school of thought and the other belonging to another school of thoughts. So, keeping that in your mind, where would you place your novel? I mean, which school of thought would you like to associate yourself with?
I think it would certainly have to be art for life. I mean, the book reads more like faction, but when you talk about faction, publishers tend to group that in terms of fiction and not non-fiction. They tend to place it in the fiction category. So the thing with my novel is that all the events are real. The 9/11, all the political events are real, but the story is fictional. It's a made-up family. But it's someone that it's a group of people that I think a lot of different people can see a reflection of their own lives in, as I said, or feel familiar with. And I think. In terms of what is better, I think both are important, art for art and art for life. I think they both serve a different type of purpose, and they should both be allowed to flourish, I guess. Yeah, Shad.
Aisha, I don't want to give away the ending because there are probably people there who haven't read the book, but the portion of the book that covers the part of her journey when she's actually back in the States is actually quite small compared to the rest of the book. Do you want to write a sequel to this? Or the reactions of the Americans towards Muslim Pakistanis after they sort of move back after what's happened is not, like, I would say, a significant majority of your books. So why the proportion?
Okay. In terms of writing a sequel, I hadn't thought about it, but you've given me an idea. No, seriously. Well, in terms of the proportion, initially, as I said, what motivated me to write the book was the 9/11. That the more interesting story would be set in Pakistan than the States. And I just felt there's more to Pakistan in terms of the different economic classes and the different, liberal versus conservative forces and so on, than to set the novel in America. And so that's why the proportion was more Pakistan and less the US. But I did want to bring up the racial profiling thing, and that's why it did end in America.
Aisha, you did not answer my second question. Which novelist you like?
Oh.
And because it gives an idea, about. And how do you see Arundhati Roy saying that this is not the time of fiction but real politics at the time when millions of masses facing a number of problems, even the very existence of this universe is at a very precarious state. And you might know that she stopped writing novels and came in, started writing political books and starting taking part in different political activities. Because you are a female novelist, so is she. So how do you view?
Well, she's a bit more accomplished, I guess. But no, she's entitled to her opinion, and I guess I'm entitled to mine. And I don't have any comment in terms of what she's saying. I can see why she may be saying it. I do believe we live in a difficult time, as I said, and these are serious issues. But I think we should also be able to laugh at them at times. And in terms of my favorite novelist, I don't know if I really have a favorite. I read a lot of different things. I read a lot of fiction. I read a lot of non-fiction, and I read a lot of ethnic authors. And and I try to read women authors. And if I tell you what the best in recent years, I really enjoyed Ghada Al-Karmi's book. In Search of Fatima, which is again it's non-fiction, but it kind of reads like a story.
Mahfouz Najib.
Yes, I like him. Bilal, yeah.
Well done, Aisha. The one question I have for you is, how is, if all of us have obviously come across the incidents as you described in your book, how has the Western press or readers, or have you, UK or American, reacted, if you've had any feedback from them, or even your publishers?
Well, the only Western people I have had feedback from are friends who have read it, and they're obviously people who have who are not your typical mainstream. They're people who are more open to different viewpoints and different ideas and so forth. In terms of Western press, I don't think there's been any press from the Western press so far, but there has been, Dawn has carried excerpts and intends to carry a review and so on. So there's been a lot of interest from the Pakistani community and also some interest from some other Muslim press as well. The Gulf News in Dubai did a piece on it not too long ago. And I think it is a battle to put forth a picture of normal Muslims and have it be accepted in the West and let it become mainstream. It's not easy. Yes.
You focus on the American experience. I just wondered to what extent you had considered how that contrasted with the British experience, particularly in the context of the last 18 months, 7/7, etc., etc. The other dimension to that is how we're sitting here this evening in the middle of the biggest film festival in the world, the London Film Festival, and yet there's very little actually on this kind of theme. There is stuff on Indian migrants going back, but there's very little on the kind of experiences that you're talking about. So the other question I'll have for you linked to that is, to what extent can this, do you feel, translate over into film? Because there's a void there that medium isn't being tapped at all effectively to convey some of these issues through fiction.
Well, I'll answer your second question first. I think it would be great if something like this can be made into film, and I agree with you that there's a void there. I think there's a void both for film and for literature, both. And that's the void I tried to fill in some way. But I think there's room for a lot more by a lot of different authors and a lot of different filmmakers. And I'm sure there are people who are trying. It's just not easy to succeed when you're trying to present this side of Muslims or Islam these days. And that to me is the most unfortunate thing of today's changing environment. And in terms of the difference in experience, I actually have not lived in America after 9/11. I lived there prior to that. So what I heard was all through very close friends who are still there. And some of the experiences that they've had or they've talked about that others have had. And I think maybe London is a bit of an anomaly when it comes to England and the other places which are very different. Whereas in the US, maybe that's not so much the case. There's no one big city which is, you know, a safe haven, so to speak. I mean, it's a very rough kind of, you know, answer to what you're asking. But London seems to be very cosmopolitan. Maybe no US city can rival that. But in terms of other parts of England, I'm not sure it's any better than what it is in the US or with the changing environment. Yes, in the back. Sorry, can you speak up just a little bit?
You've got your character going from America to Pakistan.
Yes.
The contrast of those experiences. Does she reflect on her change her role as a machine as a result, and possibly restricted lines of women there, but has your nomadic experience going from the West to Saudi Arabia to Pakistan and Africa, has that fed into the book? You know, perhaps the differing lives of women in the West compared to someone like Pakistan?
Well, you asked a good question. I think when we talk about lives of women in Pakistan, it's difficult to generalize because there's not one Pakistan. There are several different, I think that based on which socioeconomic background you come from, your situation is vastly different in Pakistan. And the same holds for women and women's rights. This novel is about a girl who comes from a family which is obviously not the, you know, the lower end, but not the very high end either. And there is a bit of that in the book. It talks about how her grandmother has different ideas of what a norm for a young girl should be. It also has, you know, a bit of, she makes a friend later on in the novel who comes from a very upper class background, and her family seems to have different ideas. And there is that in the book. And it talks about her adolescence and her changes, and as a woman, apart from the change from the US to Pakistan, it also talks about her growing years and how she has to cope with that as well. So I hope that answers your question. Yes?
I have a question which I suppose touches on a couple of things that you've spoken about, and I think people have asked it of you, so I apologize for repeating it a little bit. I think what's quite interesting in the excerpts that you've read is I guess the post-national framing of the narrative, and also your own sensibility as a cosmopolitan author writing this sort of text after 9/11, which you define as a foundational kind of moment for your text. And I was wondering how you see yourself as an author, because a lot of writers from the subcontinent writing in the post-1947 scenario have always been quite critical of nationalism itself. And it's interesting in your novel, the bits that you've read, because I haven't read it, so I might be completely wrong here, that it almost seems to be taking us back to the idea of nationalism as an ideal or as a utopian space, which in many ways has been critiqued by others in, you know, say somebody like Arundhati Roy, if you want to compare yourself with an Indian counterpart. And I was wondering how you sort of see that yourself. And also the other question I wanted to ask was, there's a slippage between Pakistan and Muslim, or the Islamic world. So how do you reconcile the ummah within your text with the sort of national as well?
Okay. In terms of your first question, there may be authors out there who critique the idea of nationalism, as you say. In the book, it's not depicted as a utopian state, so that's not the case. But it is very much, in terms of how most of the characters in the novel feel or talk, it is a given. It's also something that I think they appreciate, and I think that's the reality in Pakistan, at least. I think most people appreciate the fact that Pakistan was created. And that's the way they want it. And so when I set a story in Pakistan, I have to be true to that sentiment. I think there are people out there who perhaps critique the whole idea of partition, but I think they're a minority. And I was writing about an average middle-class family, and this is how most of them think. And the other question you asked about the slippage between Muslim and Pakistan, yes, that's definitely there, but Pakistan is what I know, and Pakistan is also a country of 160 million Muslim, well, largely Muslims, a few minorities, but it's therefore, I think, as good a place as any to set a novel that talks about how Muslim sentiment, essentially. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Okay, let's give her a big hand. You can sign.
Yeah, anybody who wants to.
This would be good enough. Perfect. Yeah.